Right, hello everyone. It is a freezing day today, and I went out and picked up, another ATV. It's a 125cc Chinese-made four-wheeler, and I'm gonna go through a build with you all on what I do, the troubleshooting I do when I pick some of these things up. And I paid 160 bucks for it, so it's a good starting point with one of these 125s. Has forward and reverse. It does not run, so we're gonna go through the entire systems and see what we can come up with, get it back to running, get it back to driving. That way the kids can enjoy it and move on to the next one. Stick with me, and this should be a good one. All right, it is up on the table, ready to go. The first thing I'm doing is walking around and kind of seeing what it's missing, what we might need. Now, one thing I have not mentioned yet was when I picked this thing up, the gentleman had told me ahead of time that his son was riding it and actually jumped it and broke the frame. That's the reason why it got parked. He said it stopped running at that point. He thinks it's because one of the wires may have snapped when the frame broke. So if you can take a peek under here, you can kind of see right there and there on both sides it broke right in half. And my goal with this build is completely tear everything off. We're going to get the plastics off. We're going to take off every bit of wiring because I don't want any of the wiring left, and 100% rebuild it front to back. That will be the goal. As far as money-wise, we're going to try and be as budget conscious as possible. I know a lot of you guys watching this are thinking, how can I fix these ATVs quickly, cheap, and turn a profit? And I'll show you what I do. That way my work stands behind it and I don't have returning customers, but also I put a good product on the road. And that's what we're going to do with this one. So follow along as I continue to tear down all the plastics and the wiring. All right. Well, the entire body has been taken off and all the wiring has been stripped. The next step will be to get the motor assembly off. But before I do that, I wanted to show you, when I take the wiring off, I actually leave a couple of the wires, only because the wiring kit we order from eBay doesn't come with 100% everything, even though it's a complete wiring harness. The one thing I keep is the stator. A lot of times the connectors don't match up with whatever the wiring harness comes with, so I always leave the stator wire just because I want to see what connections we have. This wire is left only because it is that's where you check your neutral and your reverse light, which we'll be removing, and it won't be on the new harness. Also, the power wire from your starter relay to your starter itself also does not come with that full kit. So we leave that there. We leave those there. That way we know what we need once we get the kit on it. But what we're going to do now is we will take off the chain and the chain guard. We will go ahead and take off the throttle, cable assembly, and actually pull this motor out on the next time lapse. Alright, well, before we get welding, what I need to do is clean up these these spots where I'm going to be welding. So we're going to go ahead 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to put the wire brush attachment on the angle grinder, and we're going to clean those up first. Everything is pretty well brushed off. I think that's good enough for now for us to be able to tack it in place before we finally figure out what kind of gussets we want to use and where we want to use them to obviously build this up and support it. Now what had happened when this frame bent down, the top of it also bent a little bit, so we're going to try and manipulate this as much as we can to get these pieces, these clean brakes, to line up exactly where they were, clamp them together long enough to get some welds in place before we put like the gussets in to get it finished up. That is our next step, is to get this lined up with this. I'll probably do that off camera, and we'll turn the camera back on when we start welding. Well, I've got you set up about as best I can. If you can see, I've used ratchet straps to kind of pull this thing together. And here's the weld. We're going to be welding right here, this frame. And this is not going to be the only weld we do, is on the spot where it broke. We're also going to put gussets in to rebuild or build this up a little bit. Sorry for the bad angle, but if I'm going to be able to do this, I got to have a little bit of room to work. So this is as good as it's going to get. But, oh, bump the camera. Here we go. Alright guys, well, it is not perfect by any means, but it is back in place. I went ahead and off camera just finished up the 2 welds on both sides. I flipped it up underneath of it and did the back side. My plan will be either to buy some gussets or to use some reinforced steel underneath of it, so that way we can get some support from up top all the way down to the bottom that it needs, and we won't have the issue again. So that is the next step, is to put reinforcements in. Also, I've got my list put together of all the parts we need to get ordered. We're going to be putting the wiring harness on, new brakes on. We're going to be repainting the body kit a different color. That's a surprise for later. And hopefully we're going to make this thing look like one badass little rig for not a lot of money. And I will put together a parts list for you guys in the description below, and what I paid for them, so you know the total cost of this build throughout the process. Alright, so like I mentioned before, we're actually going to go ahead and change the color of the body itself. Now, I went ahead and just ordered all the parts that we need for the build inside. I came back out this evening to go ahead and get some of the paint started to be stripped off. That way I can fill the time while we're waiting for parts to come with more project work. And that's what I'm going to do this evening. What we're going to do is, on the time lapse, you're going to see me spray this down with the paint remover, and then we'll go ahead and take a scraper and scrape off the green camo type paint that's on there now. So we'll start that process, and once it's completely stripped, we'll get it paint ready and primed and painted. Here we go. Here's what I've got so far. I'm doing a lot of the work off camera. I don't think you guys are watching this video to see how paint is taken off. So I'm going to continue to hack away at this thing and get all the extra paint off and all the nicks and crannies. That way, when we go for paint, I don't have any painting issues. So we'll keep working on that throughout this process off camera. So by the time you guys see it, it'll be prepped and ready for paint. But for now, what I want to show you is the motor itself. Now, I put it up on the stand, and the oil plug was just completely covered, caked in oil residue. And I did take I wiped it off, I took the plug out, and this thing is overfilled with oil. And I think it's mixed with oil and gas from sitting for so long. I believe probably some of the gas from the carburetor overflowed and actually backfilled into the case. over time, and that's not good. I don't want to have any rust inside the case or any issues. So my process today will be to drain that oil out, put new oil in. We're going to check the starter and then check for compression for the motor before we put it back in. The last thing I want to do is get this whole project done, put the motor in, and find out we've got a bent valve or blown head or some rust or some internal parts that are having some issues. Because obviously this is a pretty crucial part to this build, and I don't want to get stuck having to pay a big bill to try and get the motor to run when I've already spent maybe more money on other things. All right, so we'll get started. We're going to take the cap off. I've got a drain pan underneath for this oil. And I'm going to go ahead. This is a 17-inch bolt. We're going to take that off first. Oh yeah, you guys, I can see water dripping out of it now, or gas. Yeah, let's go ahead and I think it's actually water, which will make this even worse. Oh yeah. Yep, that is gonna be bad. We're going to change the oil probably a couple times. Gosh dang. And while this continues to drain out, I'm going to go ahead and take off that carburetor now and then get ready so we can turn it over while it just keeps leaking out oil and then water or gas or whatever the mixture is. But either way, it's not good. And we're going to get this thing cleaned out as best we can. All right, for the first run, what I'm going to do is I've got some 10W40 I've had laying around the shop here for a little while, so I'm going to throw that in. It looks like I got about 12 ounces or so that's going to go into it, maybe a little less depending on how much it needs. And then you'll also notice I grabbed a 12-volt battery, and I hooked up the power wire to the starter motor directly. And then on the other side, I've just got clamped on a negative wire, which we're going to take and ground anywhere against the starter and see if the starter, one, if it turns over and works, and two, if it does work, we're going to check for compression. The first thing is to pour the oil in. And I will be changing this oil again. This is just to put in there for temporary oil. Just that way we can have something while we're running the compression tech. But once we get it actually on the bike and get it dialed in and tuned up, we're going to go ahead and change it again. So that's got plenty of oil. I wouldn't say plenty, it's got enough oil. And now we're going to see if it turns over. All right, so that's good. So it does have a good starter. which is fantastic. We don't need to go ahead and order one of those. The next thing I'm going to do is put a compression check on, but I'm going to check with my finger first. I'm going to put my finger in there to see if it blows my finger off. Yep, so I'm pretty sure it's going to have good compression, but I'll grab my compression check and we'll set it up and let you see what that's going to be. All right, I've got the compression check set up. We're going to go ahead and strike it and see if we can't get a good reading. Now, you're going to see some sparks that come off the starter motor. That's going to happen no matter what we do because we're just jumping the ground. So don't be alarmed if that does happen. Whoa. Take two. That is at 150. Wow, that's that's impressive. We'll give her one more go. Yeah, that's 150, 160. Wow, that's great. That is great. I think we're gonna have a good running motor. Like I said, we're gonna change that oil. Other than that, we'll get this thing back in the bike back in the ATV once that frame support's done. I couldn't really find a good place to put in some cross braces or some gussets to really make this stronger. So I ended up just building up the welds all the way around and kind of just booger welding it up just to give it some extra reinforced strength. And we're going to go with that and clean those up a little bit and paint them so they don't rust and see how that goes. One other thing I did notice also was the brake booster bracket was also broke off the frame when this piece dropped down. It looks like I've got it clamped in place the best I can, and I'm going to go back in with the welder and just tack that back on so that's also there. Once I get that done, I'm going to go pressure wash the whole, I guess you call it, frame and chassis off, and then from there we'll bring it back in on the table, get the motor mocked up, and continue working on this guy. All right, so the frame has been washed. I came back in and I shot those welds that I did with some black spray paint. That way we can keep it from rusting. Next, what we're gonna do is take the motor. I'm gonna go blow all the crap off the top. We're gonna get that mounted back into the bike, as well as the new chain that came in today and the new battery that I have on the charger. We'll go ahead and get all that lined up and basically have it ready for the wiring harness and the carburetor when they get here. All right, so here's what's next. I'm moving on to the body, and the first thing I'm going to do is actually undercoat it. And what I've done so far is gone through and masked off the top side of all the openings of the holes. That way when we're spraying, we don't get any on the other side. And as I go through, I'm going to take this piece of cardboard and I'm going to hold it along the sides, like this, and spray as I go along. That way we don't have very much overspray of that undercoating. Once that's done, we'll flip it over and we will prime it and let that sit, and then we'll start painting. All right, so I just wrapped up the undercoating. We went through that full can and thoroughly sprayed everything over with this guy. And while that waits to dry, and before we do primer on the other side, I'm going to start working on the electrical because we do have the wiring harness in. Now, I went ahead and already kind of prepped this harness. Some of you guys that have never put in a new wiring harness before, it can look a little intimidating coming out of the box, but let me reassure you, it is pretty straightforward. I think you can't even click a connector in the wrong spot. But going front to back, you've got your kill, your lights, and your start button. Easy connection right into the harness. You've got your ignition switch, 2 wires up front that also have, it is one black, one green, and yellow. That is for your brake light. You can see it comes with the CDI box. Miscellaneous wires, you've got 2. You can see that are 3 wires, green, blue, and white. Those are both your headlights. These 2 go to your coil. And then you've got this one left that comes in a lot of these. That is another black, green, and yellow, which match your front brake lights. That is if you have a foot brake that has a plug-in for the brake light. Mine does not, so that's probably going to go unused. Working our way through the wiring harness, that you can see the CDI connections, or excuse me, the stator connections. I went ahead and got those already put together and kind of prepped both on the harness and on the bike. There's another plug that goes to your starter relay. That starter relay gets plugged in here, and also the lead off of your positive battery, that thick wire, goes there as well. And then you've got your magnifier, or whatever it is. I don't really know the technical term, but I call it a magnifier. If that's right, great. And then on the very end, you've got another 3 wires into a female connector. That is for your brake lights. And the last one is for your tether. A lot of people have like the tethers. That way if you fall off, it pulls the plug. That is that's a kill. It kills your spark. We're not going to be using one of those either, so also probably an unused plug that we're just going to cap with a female end and leave it be. So what I do is I'm going to go ahead and take this harness and I'm going to assemble it off the ATV first. I'm going to get the stator wires all connected. I'm going to get the battery connected, and I'm going to take the positive terminal cable, or positive cable from the starter motor, and I'm going to hook that up to the starter relay. And once I do that, everything should be live, with the exception of ground. We got a ground. Everything should be live, and we should be able to turn the bike over. So we're going to accomplish 2 things by doing this. We're going to do 1, make sure the bike, everything functions to where the bike turns over, and then also we're going to pull the spark plug and out of the coil and make sure that we have spark, because if I've got compression, which we know we do, and I've got spark, we may be able to hear the motor fire once I get the preliminary test set up. So I'm going to put you on the stand. I'm going to fast track this with the time lapse, and hopefully you'll see me in just a sec with it looking like it's ready to fire. Alright, so I'll bring you guys in closer and show you the whole setup. You can see that the coil, I hung that up. I've got a spark plug in, so that's sitting right there. Comes down, all connected. I went ahead and connected loosely the stator wires, and you can notice that none of them are touching. Obviously, we don't want to bridge anything there. And then we went ahead and hooked up power and ground to the battery. Starter, that's the starter relay, so that's the starter wire that's turned on, and also there's ground coming off of the battery as well. So everything is hooked up like it could turn over. I'm going to go ahead and hit the key and turn it. We're going to see 1 of 2 things. 1, what's turn over, and 2, do we have spark? Let me set you down. So key is on. Nothing. One thing that, so a lot of times what will happen is the two wires that I showed you for brake also kill spark if they're not, as a safety feature. So let's go ahead and hold these two together. Holding those two together as if we're pulling the brake pedal and connecting or pulling the brake handle and connecting the circuit. So let's go and try it now. Oh, there we go. We got it. So when those two are apart, we got nothing. Those two together. And we have spark too, guys. I'm going to go ahead and bring you in for that. See if I can't get you set up a little bit here. There we go. Focus. Trying to do this with one hand so you guys can see it. And we got good spark. All right, that is awesome. So we know we have spark. We know we've got a starter. We know we've got everything set up correctly. So what I'm going to do now is before I actually go ahead and clean up all these wires is we're going to go ahead and dribble a little bit of fuel down the intake and see if we can't get it to maybe pop off for a quick second. A little bit of gasoline it is. All right, that was awesome. One more time. Let's do one more time. Ooh, that was loud. It scared me. All right, so we know it runs. It runs. It's got spark. It's got compression. Let's get the wiring kit reassembled on the bike so it's nice and clean and everything's put where we want it. And then we'll start moving on to the next stuff. Here's the time lapse of me putting the wiring kit on. I'll take you guys in for a little closer look on the wiring. And what I've done is pretty much get everything neat and organized where I want it. On the top, you can see that both ground and power cables for the battery are coming out the top, nice and neat. And then everything else is kind of inline, zip tied, cleaned up, ready to go. Now on the front end, there's a lot we can't do yet just because the body's not on and the handlebars aren't on. So I've left those off for now, but cleaned up as much as I possibly can. One thing that I have not done yet is take out the old neutral forward reverse light switch. So I'm going to take that out right now, take this cover off, get that wire off. That way that's done and out of the way. And then we're going to hook the battery back up and make sure that everything works now that we've got it all cleaned up on the bike. All right, that's off. The battery's hooked back up. Let's make sure we got it all good to go. Key is in the on position. I did put the back brake light on also. So if you notice when I hit the two brake lights, we've got brake lights. I'm going to turn the switch all the way over to full lights all the time. Brake light and then boom. So that's pretty cool. We're going to go ahead and strip a little more fuel down. Make sure that our brake light is on, switch is on, and we're good. All right, we are good to go with wiring. Well, I am just gonna keep chugging along today as much as I can get done. This exhaust, as you can see, is pretty thoroughly rusted throughout the whole thing. And while I'm literally waiting for paint to dry, I'm going to go ahead and take a wire brush and start cleaning all this up. That way we can put some high temp black heat paint back on it and put it back on the bike before the plastics are done. All right, well, I have to apologize. My phone had died halfway through that recording of grinding the exhaust and painting it. So here's the end result. I went ahead and shot it with a flat black paint, exhaust paint, and also I took the side heat shield off and painted that in flame red. That is the color that we will be going with the body. So what I did was I started getting the body prepped. I actually ended up taking some carburetor cleaner and wipe down all the overspray on the outside of the body here. Next, what I'm going to do is take it completely with the wax and tar remover and then hit it with the primer. So here is me doing that. First coat of primer is on, and while we're waiting on that to dry, we're going to go ahead and get started on the carburetor. Now, I've got it set up over here where I've kind of done some of the work ahead of time. I got the carburetor out, and what I did was I started mocking up the fuel line before I actually put it on. And what I did was I actually put a fuel filter in between. I just had an extra one laying around the shop, and I thought better be safe than sorry. I also flushed out the fuel tank with fresh fuel, and then the air gun, and then fresh fuel, and the air gun, and now it's back on the ATV as well. So we're gonna mock this up. Excuse me, we're gonna put this up and hopefully be able to hear it idle today. So that's, I'm gonna set you guys on the stand right here. All right, we're gonna put some gas in it, and we're gonna make sure we don't have any leaks from the bowl or from the line or the tank itself. That should be plenty. Looking for leaks anywhere. Everything looks dry. All right, time to see if it runs. And we're gonna hold our two wires, our brake light together. So the brake light back and forth. Here we go. Throw the choke up, see if it'll go that way. We don't have the throttle yet. That's not hooked up, but I just want to make sure it was an idle run. You're good to go. Awesome. So now that we know it's running good, I'm going to go ahead and jump back on the body. I did put a second coat of primer on it, and the next step I'm going to do before paint is actually hit it with a wet sand with a 600 grit, make it nice and smooth, but also have enough texture for the new paint to adhere to. So this is me wet sanding and painting the first coat. Time for coat number 2. Alright guys, so the painting is complete off camera. I did hit it with the third coat of paint as well as 2 coats of clear, and for a rattle can paint job, I'll be honest, it came out looking pretty sweet. I'm very happy with the end result, especially going with the undercoating on the bottom and the flame red on top. So I went ahead and put it on top of the ATV itself, kind of getting it mocked up and getting ready for our fit and finish part where we can get it all put together and run it and put it out the door. And I noticed a big thing that really stands out to me. And if you guys haven't noticed it already, it's that we went with a flame red body and there are green shocks. And that color combination may look great for Christmas, but not so great for the ATV look that we're going for here. So without changing that, that is going to bug me, and it has to be a different color. So what I'm going to do is I am going to finish everything up, buttoning this ATV up with all the wiring, the headlights, the racks and everything, but then we're going to move on to the springs themselves. And I kind of got carried away off camera already taking this one off, and I've got it set up here on the table. As you can see, I've got my spring compressor tools here. We went ahead and compressed the spring. There's a little nut on the top. We took the nut off and therefore freed up all of the components. Now, with this green, we're probably going to keep it super simple. I thought about painting the shock itself red, going with black, vice versa. But ultimately, we're going to keep this simple and clean. We're going to clean the shock up itself. I'm going to scuff up this green because this is powder coated. This is pretty good paint. And I don't want to strip all that off because it is protecting the spring. What I'm going to end up doing is taking all 3 springs off. I'm going to scuff them up and clean them, and then most likely hit them with a black spray paint of some kind to go ahead and give it a universal black color, reassemble all the shocks, put them back on the ATV, and we will be done. So on this next time lapse of video, you're going to see me putting everything back together, and then we'll go ahead and start working on these springs after that. All right, so just to catch you guys up to speed where we're at, the front end is pretty much wrapped up. The headlights are in and wired in. The covers are all on. The handlebars are on with all the controls are all there. Everything works great. We got the side covers on. The seat is now mounted. Everything is pretty much put together. Just got a few more things to button up. The front rack needs to go on still. On the front, kind of get the wires lined up and zip tied up, get the handle grips on, and then we'll move on to the shocks. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about the shocks is when I was going through one of my junk piles for these ATVs, I noticed that I had a pair of black shocks in there. Now this one bent, and we just ordered a new set and replaced them both. But I believe that this spring might be okay. I think the shock itself is what is bent. So after I'm done getting everything buttoned up on the ATV, we're going to try and take those springs off and just use those two, throw those on the shocks that are already on the ATV, and call this thing done. So I'm going to finish wiring up the brake light, get all that stuff on, and then go ahead and get the shocks cleaned up, and we are going to wrap this guy up. All right, here we go. Okay, well, the spring compressor did not work, so I'm making an executive decision to cut this shock, and I'm going to be honest, I'm not super thrilled about the idea, but we better catch it on video just in case I get really, really hurt, and you guys can learn from my mistakes. So I'm going to come in underneath, I'm going to give it a cut right here, and just hopefully it doesn't shoot off and hurt anybody. Whew. There we go. 100% back to form. That will work. So we're gonna go ahead, take the other black spring on, put the two black springs on, be done. Oh, that's awesome. All right, so the springs are on. I went ahead and thought twice about filming it, only because springs are super dangerous, you guys, and I don't want anyone taking my advice on how to do them and possibly getting yourself hurt. So those are done. I got the shifter on, the wiring's all zip tied and buttoned up 100%. Grips are on, seats on. We are done. So thank you guys so much for watching this. Please like and subscribe. I do have more content coming in the future. Here's a little preview of the next 110 project we'll be working on, and it is a mess. So stay tuned for that. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next one.